Hello, I'm Demi Utley, back again with part 2 of the proposal terms and helping you to define them. So that way, when you come across these, whenever you're going after opportunities, you are best positioned to create your best possible proposal because you know exactly what it is that they're requesting. So today we're going to go over a few, I would say, easier terms, but helping you to understand the differences between all of them. So let's go ahead and get started. First, today, we are going to start with the term BAFO, so BAFO, and this stands for Best and Final Offer. This typically occurs at the very end of the procurement process, often after any presentations that you might give, but typically before contract negotiations. And this is where the buyer will actually ask you to provide your best and final offer. So this often means, can you provide us a lower price? Sometimes they just want to know if you're going to offer anything else or just make sure that this is the best that you can do, essentially. So it's up to you in those moments to decide if you do want to lower your price or offer something else. But just know whenever an RFP says that there may be a best and final offer, that this is what it's referring to. The second term I'm going to go over today is request for proposals. So you likely already know what this means, but I'm including it just in case. So request for proposal stands for RFP, and this is when a buyer asks vendors to send in a proposal for a specific type of product or service or solution that they're hoping to procure. And many organizations have a minimum threshold for where they do have to go to RFP. A lot of times this is maybe if it's over $100,000, sometimes it's $250,000. It varies for each organization, but a lot of times they have this process in place where once it reaches a certain value, they have to go through RFP to make sure that they're awarding it to the best possible vendor, doing their due diligence to find the best solution for them. So one thing to note is that if you see an RFP in the public sector, those are public by definition, and anyone can respond most of the time. The one exception I would say is if there's an RFI where you had to bid to that first in order to be able to bid on the RFP, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But if it's in the public sector, those RFPs are public, so anyone can find and respond, which means that your competition is anyone who sees the listing and thinks that they're qualified. In the commercial space for private organizations, they normally send out an RFP to a selected list of vendors who they likely have already met and evaluated, and they've had a few sales meetings with. So it's just a slightly different process whenever you're working on an RFP in the public sector, which also often has more hoops that you have to jump through, such as like forms and just like stricter compliance requirements. Whereas in the commercial space, it's normally a little bit faster and I would say less intense of a process, not always, but overall, it's just a little more straightforward. So that is RFP. The next term I wanted to go over today is a request for qualifications. So request for qualifications also can have the acronym of RFQ, and this typically occurs before the RFP. I've seen these most often in the construction space. So a request for qualifications is where they're trying to find a pool of vendors who are qualified to do the work. And then they use the RFQ to actually narrow down the list of potential bidders for the actual RFP. So in a lot of cases, if you see a request for qualifications, they will require that you respond to that first to make sure that you're actually qualified, and then they'll have you go through the actual RFP process. And this is just to make sure that there's, they don't have a lot of proposals to evaluate that aren't applicable or that aren't qualified to do the work, and also to make it easier for you so you're not creating a full quote and proposal for something that where they would already like plan to narrow down the pool. So it's good to know that if you see a request for qualifications and you do think that you want to respond to it, make sure you respond to the RFQ first, because you might not get a chance to respond to the actual RFP. And then we have another RFQ, which is request for quote. So this is where a buying agency will ask vendors to provide a quote for a specific project. So these are often pretty simple. It's normally not a full RFP where they expect a proposal. Many times they are just looking for a quote, maybe a few forms that you have to fill out. So whenever it's a request for a quote, just know that they're evaluating on pricing most of the time, and you're just sending in a quote. So it's a pretty easy process. The next term on the list is a request for information, which I've kind of already touched on a little bit. So request for information, the acronym is RFI, and it occurs before the RFP phase. So you can think of this the same way as the request for qualifications. This is where they're sometimes they'll use an RFI to narrow down the pool of vendors, but a lot of times they're using the RFI to learn more about potential solutions on the market. So whenever you're responding to an RFI, one thing that you want to keep in mind is how can we present our solution so that they want this specific solution and that's what they write the RFP for versus just a general solution. So by that, I mean, if we say something very simple of, we'll just say ink pens, if they wanted to buy some pens from you and they first wrote this for like any kind of pen and you only sell blue pens, then you would maybe explain why this is a better option. Again, this is super simplified, but you want to show them why they should only want blue pens, and then they're going to release the RFP for blue pens. So then your competitors are only those who are selling the blue pens. So it sort of narrows down the pool of potential bidders for that RFP phase and makes it easier for you to show your strengths and why you are best positioned to be the one to get that work. So whenever you're going after the RFI, try to think through that and how you can position your company to show why your like general solution, maybe not you specifically, although of course include that, but you really want to try to help steer them to your solution so that way you have a more of a competitive advantage when the RFP comes out. The next and last term for today is statement of work. So some people call this SOW, some people call this SOW. It really just depends on the organization, but this is the detailed description of the project. So this is the statement of the work that you are actually going to do. The RFP or any other bid document may include a statement of work that they have written for what they want to be a part of the project, or you might include your own within the proposal or just directly address whatever it is that they included. But the goal with the statement of work is to clearly define the scope of what work you're going to provide for this project. This is specific to services. Like if you're selling products, this doesn't typically come up. But if you are selling services or any project that includes some sort of service, you're going to want to have somewhere in your proposal a statement of work just to show, hey, this is what's within scope and this is what's out of scope. So that way you're not held to something that's beyond what you priced for. So that's it for today. That was a very quick overview of a few key terms. I hope you found this helpful. And just like last time, if there are any terms that you have come across and you don't know exactly what they mean or how you should approach them, feel free to include them in the comments and I'll try to incorporate them in future videos. In the meantime, make sure you subscribe so you get the rest of the videos in this series, and I will see you next time.